Do you think they buy trash here? This is a luxury establishment, not a thrift store, the black-haired woman sneered, eyeing the delicate ring in Sarah's hand. Some people are just so desperate. Sarah ignored the comment, her eyes pleading to the suited appraiser. Please, sir, it's all I have. My son needs medicine, she begged. The back office door opened and a man stepped out, looking annoyed. What's the problem here? He began to say, then his eyes landed on Sarah and his voice faded. But before we see what he does, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, subscribe to the channel and let's get to the full story. Mom, I can't breathe, Marcus whispered, his small chest rising and falling too fast in the dark bedroom. Sarah Johnson jolted awake, reaching for the lamp on the nightstand. The dim yellow light revealed her 10-year-old son's frightened eyes. His lips had a bluish tint that made her heart race. Where's your inhaler, sweetie? Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice calm. It's empty, Marcus gasped between labored breaths. Sarah helped him sit up straight, rubbing his back in slow circles. Take slow breaths. Michael, wake up and get the spare inhaler from the bathroom cabinet. In the bed across the room, Michael and Mason stirred. The three boys looked almost identical with their dark, curly hair and amber eyes, though Marcus was slightly smaller than his brothers. Michael returned quickly. Here, Mom. The relief on Marcus's face as the medicine opened his airways was worth everything to Sarah. She stayed beside him until his breathing normalized, but worry gnawed at her stomach. This was his third attack this week, and the specialist had prescribed a new medication that cost $600. $600 she didn't have. When morning light filtered through the thin curtains of their Brightmoor apartment, Sarah sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills marked "Past Due" in angry red letters. She opened her banking app on her phone. $32.47. Not enough for the medication, not enough for the overdue rent, not even enough for next week's groceries. Is everything okay, Mom? Mason asked, the quietest of her triplets, always noticing too much. Sarah forced a smile. Everything's fine. Eat your cereal before it gets soggy. We need to leave early today. After the boys finished breakfast and brushed their teeth, Sarah opened her dresser drawer and removed a small velvet box hidden beneath her folded sweaters. Inside lay a gold ring with tiny diamonds arranged in a circle. Her grandmother had given it to her before she died, telling Sarah to save it for something truly important. Marcus's wheezing in the night had made the decision clear. Boys, we need to make a quick stop before your doctor appointment, Sarah announced as they boarded the city bus downtown. Where are we going? Michael asked, always the most curious. A jewelry store, Sarah replied, clutching her purse with the velvet box inside. Downtown Detroit had changed in recent years. New businesses and shiny buildings stood where abandoned storefronts once were. The bus stopped near a row of luxury shops with gleaming windows and well-dressed people going in and out. Harrington Jewelers stood at the center, its gold-lettered sign and crystal displays visible from the sidewalk. Sarah took a deep breath and squeezed Marcus's hand. Stay together and don't touch anything, she instructed as they entered. Immediately, a security guard near the door straightened, watching them with narrowed eyes. The triplets huddled near the entrance while Sarah approached the counter. The store smelled like expensive perfume, and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. A saleswoman with perfectly styled blonde hair glanced at Sarah's worn coat and hesitated before walking over. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice cool and professional. "I would like to sell this, please," Sarah said quietly, opening the velvet box. "It belonged to my grandmother." The saleswoman barely looked at the ring before calling over a man in a dark suit. "Mr. Parker will need to examine this." From nearby, a sharp voice cut through the hushed store. "Do you think they buy trash here?" Sarah turned to see a tall woman with sleek black hair and designer clothes speaking loudly to her companion. This was Victoria Westfield, though Sarah didn't know her name yet. This is a luxury establishment, not a pawn shop, Victoria continued, making no effort to lower her voice. Some people are so desperate they don't know their place. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she stood straight as Mr. Parker examined her ring under a special magnifying glass. "I'm afraid this isn't worth much," he said after a moment. "The gold is 10 carat, not 18 as you might have thought, and these aren't diamonds. They're cubic zirconia." Sarah's heart sank. "How much can you give me for it?" $75 at most. Sarah gripped the counter edge. "Please, my son is sick. He needs medicine. This is all I have." Victoria laughed loudly. "Security should escort her out. This is embarrassing for everyone." Suddenly, a door marked "Private Office" opened. A man in an expensive gray suit emerged, looking irritated. "What's the problem out here?" he asked, his voice deep and commanding. The moment he looked at Sarah, his face changed. All color drained from his features. Sarah stared back, equally shocked. Richard Harrington hadn't changed much since high school 11 years ago. Taller, broader in the shoulders, more confident in his stance, but those were the same blue eyes that had once looked at her with such affection during advanced math class. "Sarah?" he whispered, barely audible. "Hello, Richard," she managed to say. Richard's gaze moved from her face to the 3 boys waiting by the door. The triplets had his chin, his eyes, and the distinctive ears that ran in his family. His confusion turned to disbelief as he looked at each identical face. At that moment, Marcus started coughing. The coughing turned to wheezing as he struggled to catch his breath. Michael quickly pulled an inhaler from his pocket and handed it to his brother. "Those boys," Richard said, his voice shaking. "Are 10 years old," Sarah finished, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. Victoria stepped forward. "Richard, shall I call security? This woman—" "Be quiet, Victoria," Richard snapped with unexpected harshness. "Sarah, please come into my office. Boys, you too." The triplets looked to their mother for direction. Sarah nodded, and they followed Richard toward his office door. Marcus was still breathing heavily, leaning against Michael for support. As the glass door closed behind them, the busy jewelry store seemed miles away. Richard stared at the 3 boys who shared his features, 11 years of secrets waiting to crash down around them all. "Mom?" Marcus asked in the sudden silence. "Who is this man?" The uncomfortable silence in Richard's elegant office seemed to stretch forever. Marcus's innocent question hung in the air as Sarah looked from her son to Richard, whose face showed shock and confusion. "This is Mr. Harrington," Sarah said carefully. "He and I went to Detroit Central High School together a long time ago." Richard remained standing behind his large wooden desk, still staring at the 3 identical boys. "You can call me Richard," he finally said, his voice softer than before. He gestured toward the leather chairs. "Please, sit down." The triplets sat together on a long couch while Sarah took a single chair. Richard slowly lowered himself into his desk chair. "Mom, my chest still hurts," Marcus whispered. Richard immediately pressed a button on his desk phone. "Janet, call Dr. Wilson and tell him I need to see him immediately. It's a medical emergency for a child." "Yes, Mr. Harrington," a woman's voice answered. Sarah looked surprised. "That's not necessary. We have a doctor's appointment later today." "Dr. Wilson is the best respiratory specialist in Michigan," Richard said firmly. "He'll see Marcus today." Michael, always the bold one, leaned forward. "Are you rich? This office is huge." "Michael," Sarah scolded, "that's not polite." Richard smiled for the first time. "It's okay. I own this jewelry store. My father started it, and now it's mine." Mason, the quietest triplet, studied Richard's face. "You have the same eyes as us." The room fell silent again. Richard looked at Sarah, his expression asking 1,000 questions. "Sarah," he finally said, "these boys, they're mine, aren't they?" Sarah straightened her back. "Yes, the triplets were born on November 15th, 10 years ago." "Why didn't you tell me?" Richard's voice cracked with emotion. I had a right to know I had children. I tried, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. I called you many times after you left for Stanford. You never called back. Richard shook his head. I never got any messages from you. My parents told me you didn't want to continue our relationship. Your parents, Sarah said bitterly. Your mother answered my calls. When I told her I was pregnant, she threatened to sue me if I tried to trap her son. Those were her exact words. Richard's face paled. That's impossible. My mother wouldn't. When the doctor told me I was having triplets, your father offered me money for my silence and disappearance. I refused. Sarah's hands were shaking now. I didn't want their money. I wanted you to know about your children. The triplets watched this exchange with wide eyes. Marcus coughed again, reminding everyone of the immediate concern. Richard stood up suddenly. We'll continue this conversation later. Right now, Marcus needs medical attention. He walked to a small refrigerator in the corner of his office and took out a water bottle, handing it to Marcus. Thank you, Marcus said quietly, taking small sips. Richard knelt in front of the boys. I'd like to get to know all of you better. Would that be okay? Michael nodded eagerly. Mason looked to his mother first, then gave a small nod. Marcus just watched Richard with curious eyes. Sarah, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Richard asked. Sarah hesitated, then turned to her sons. Boys, wait here for just a minute. We'll be right outside the door. Just outside the office, Richard and Sarah could see Victoria watching them through the glass walls. Her eyes narrowed as she pretended to arrange a jewelry display. Is she really our son's medical condition serious? Richard asked in a low voice. His asthma is getting worse. The new medication costs $600 and insurance won't cover it. Sarah looked away. That's why I came to sell my grandmother's ring. Richard ran a hand through his hair. I'll pay for whatever he needs. Whatever all of them need. We've managed for 10 years without your help, Sarah said stiffly. And I've missed 10 years of their lives because of my parents' lies, Richard countered. Please let me help now. Inside the office, they could see Victoria had entered and was speaking to the boys. Sarah quickly opened the door. Must be exciting to suddenly find out you're related to one of Detroit's wealthiest families, Victoria was saying with a fake smile. That's enough, Victoria, Richard said sharply. Please leave my office. Victoria's smile disappeared. Of course, Richard. We'll talk later about this situation. She walked out, closing the door with a little too much force. I don't like her, Michael announced. Richard laughed, despite himself. She works for me. She's good at her job, but not always good with people. A knock at the door interrupted them. Richard's assistant, Janet, appeared. Dr. Wilson can see you immediately, Mr. Harrington. His office is expecting you. Thank you, Richard said. He turned to Sarah. I'd like to drive you all there myself, if that's okay. 20 minutes later, they sat in Dr. Wilson's waiting room. The office was in a tall building with views of the Detroit River. The triplets pressed their faces against the windows, pointing at boats. Sarah, Richard said quietly, I want to be part of their lives. I've missed so much already. It's not that simple, Sarah replied. They don't know you. You can't just appear with money and gifts and expect to be their father. Fatherhood is earned. Then let me earn it, Richard said. Give me a chance. Dr. Wilson himself came to the waiting room to greet them. Richard, good to see you. And this must be young Marcus. After a thorough examination, Dr. Wilson prescribed the expensive medication and several others. His lungs sound concerning, he told Sarah and Richard, but with proper treatment he should improve quickly. Richard paid for everything before Sarah could object. As they left the medical building, his phone buzzed repeatedly with messages. I need to return to the store, he said reluctantly, but I'd like to see the boys again soon. Maybe dinner tomorrow? Sarah looked at her sons, who were watching this exchange with great interest. We'll talk about it. The boys have homework and routines. Please, Mom? Michael asked. I want to see his jewelry store again. We'll see, Sarah said, which made Michael smile because it wasn't a no. As Richard's driver took them home to Brightmoor, the triplets whispered among themselves in the back seat. Do you think he's really our dad? Mason asked quietly. He has our eyes, Michael replied. And he's super rich. Mom seems upset, Marcus observed between coughs. In the front seat, Sarah stared out the window, wondering how their lives would change now that Richard had entered the picture. Meanwhile, back at Harrington Jewelers, Victoria Westfield sat at her desk, typing rapidly on her computer. The screen showed search results for Sarah Johnson Detroit single mother triplets. Her red-painted fingernails clicked on the keyboard as she dug deeper. Her phone rang and she answered immediately. Yes, this is Victoria Westfield. I need information on a Sarah Johnson and her 3 sons. I'll pay extra for anything you can find quickly. As she hung up, Victoria watched Richard return to the store. His usual confident stride was missing, replaced by the walk of a man whose world had just been turned upside down. Victoria smiled to herself. There's more to this story, she whispered, and I'm going to find out exactly what it is. Richard entered his office and closed the door. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old high school yearbook. Turning to the senior photos, he found Sarah's smiling face and his own, just pages apart. He never imagined then that 11 years later, he would discover he had 3 sons who had grown up without him. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. We need to talk about your new family situation. There's more to this story than she's telling you. Richard stared at Victoria's message on his phone. What could she possibly know about Sarah and the boys that he didn't? He closed the yearbook and put his phone away. Victoria was probably just trying to create trouble. He had more important things to focus on, getting to know his sons. 3 days later, Richard parked his car outside Franklin Elementary School in Brightmoor. His hands were sweaty on the steering wheel as he watched children pour out of the building. After talking with Sarah on the phone, she had agreed to let him take the boys for ice cream after school. He spotted them immediately. 3 identical boys in blue school uniform shirts. Richard stepped out of his car and waved. Hi, Michael called, running ahead of his brothers. Cool car. Is it really yours? Yes, it is, Richard smiled. How was school today? Boring, Michael said. We had a math test. Mason approached more slowly, staying a step behind his brothers. He didn't speak but studied Richard's face carefully. Hi, Marcus, Richard said to the 3rd boy. Are you feeling better after seeing Dr. Wilson? Marcus nodded. The new medicine helps. I don't cough as much now. I'm glad, Richard said. So I thought we could get ice cream and maybe I could show you where I work. The real part, not just the store you saw. Yes, Michael pumped his fist. Can we go now? Is your mom okay with this? Mason asked quietly, his first words to Richard. Yes, I talked to her yesterday, Richard assured him. She knows we'll be back by 6 o'clock. The boys climbed into Richard's car. He had never felt so nervous driving before. 3 lives were now his responsibility, at least for the afternoon. Instead of taking them directly for ice cream, Richard drove to Silver Spoon, an upscale restaurant in downtown Detroit. We're eating here? Marcus asked, looking at the fancy building. They have the best desserts in the city, Richard said proudly. Inside, a host in a dark suit showed them to a table. The restaurant was filled with business people in expensive clothes. Richard didn't notice how the boys shrank in their school uniforms, but Mason saw the looks they received. Can we just get ice cream somewhere else? Mason whispered. Richard looked surprised. Don't you like it here? It's very quiet, Marcus said, fidgeting with his silverware. Michael, usually talkative, had gone silent too. Oh, Richard realized his mistake. Of course. Let's go somewhere else. At a simple ice cream shop near the riverfront, the boys relaxed again. Michael got chocolate with extra sprinkles, Marcus chose vanilla, and Mason picked mint. This is way better, Michael said, his face covered in chocolate. Richard smiled, making a mental note. Fancy restaurants made the boys uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Sarah cleaned offices in a downtown building. She wiped sweat from her forehead as she emptied trash cans and vacuumed floors. Her phone sat in her pocket and she checked it constantly, worried about the boys with Richard. "They're fine," she told herself. "He's their father." But 11 years of being solely responsible for the triplets made it hard to trust anyone else with them. After ice cream, Richard drove the boys to Harrington Jewelers. "We're going back to the store?" Marcus asked. "Yes, but not the part customers see," Richard explained. "I want to show you my workshop where I design jewelry." Richard led them through a private entrance to a large room in the back. Workbenches lined the walls with special lights and tools for jewelry making. "Wow," Michael breathed, moving closer to examine the equipment. "You make the jewelry yourself?" "Some of it," Richard nodded. "I design special pieces for important customers." Richard showed Michael how to use a magnifying glass to examine a sapphire. The boy's eyes lit up with interest. "Can I try drawing something?" Michael asked. Richard provided paper and pencils, and Michael began sketching a bracelet design. His small hands worked quickly, showing surprising talent. While Michael drew, Marcus discovered a chess set on a table in the corner. "Do you play?" Richard asked. Marcus nodded. "Mom taught us. I beat Mason sometimes, but he usually wins." "Would you like to play a game?" Richard offered. They set up the pieces, and Richard soon discovered Marcus was a strategic thinker. The boy planned several moves ahead and captured Richard's bishop within minutes. Mason watched from a distance, observing how Richard interacted with his brothers. Across town, Victoria Westfield sat in Mrs. Peterson's living room. The elderly woman had been friends with Richard's mother for 40 years. "It was such a shame how that girl tried to trap Richard," Mrs. Peterson said, pouring tea. "Eleanor was right to protect her son." "Did you ever meet Sarah Johnson?" Victoria asked. "No, but Eleanor told me everything. The girl called claiming she was pregnant, demanding money. Eleanor said she was just a gold digger from the poor side of town." Victoria smiled. "This is very helpful, Mrs. Peterson." Later that evening, Richard drove the boys to their apartment building in Brightmoor. The neighborhood was run down with broken streetlights and graffiti on walls. "You live here?" Richard asked, trying to hide his shock. "Apartment 4C. Michael pointed. "It's on the 3rd floor. The elevator doesn't work, though." Inside, the apartment was small but clean. A living room with a worn couch connected to a tiny kitchen. School awards and children's artwork covered the refrigerator. "This is our room," Marcus said, leading Richard to a bedroom where 3 small beds were squeezed together. A chest of drawers stood against one wall and school books were stacked neatly on a desk. "We take turns at the desk for homework," Mason explained. Richard noticed water stains on the ceiling and a draft from the window that didn't close properly. "I could help you move to a better place," Richard said. "A house with a bedroom for each of you in a safer neighborhood with good schools." "Mom says we're staying here," Mason said firmly. "But why?" Richard asked. This is our home," Mason interrupted. "Mom works really hard so we can live here." Richard nodded, understanding he had overstepped. "You're right. I'm sorry." The apartment door opened and Sarah entered, still wearing her cleaning uniform. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and she moved slowly, clearly exhausted. "You're still here," she said to Richard, surprised. "I was just leaving," Richard said quickly. "Thank you for letting me spend time with the boys." "Did you have fun?" Sarah asked her sons. "Richard has a cool workshop," Michael exclaimed. "And I designed a bracelet." "I beat him at chess," Marcus added. "Mason?" Sarah looked at her quietest son. "It was okay," Mason said. "The restaurant was weird, though." Sarah raised an eyebrow at Richard, who looked embarrassed. "I'm learning," he admitted. "Can I see them again soon?" Sarah hesitated, then nodded. Saturday, but no fancy restaurants. After Richard left, Sarah sank onto the couch. The boys crowded around her, talking over each other about their afternoon. "He's really nice, Mom," Michael said. "And he knows a lot about jewelry." "He's okay at chess," Marcus added. "Not as good as you." "Do you think he'll stay around?" Mason asked quietly. Sarah hugged her sons. "I don't know, sweetie. But we'll be fine either way, just like always." In her office, Victoria organized a folder labeled Sarah Johnson. Inside were financial records showing Sarah's multiple jobs, late rent notices, and school reports for the triplets. Victoria added notes from her conversation with Mrs. Peterson. "This gold digger won't fool Richard for long," Victoria murmured to herself. On Saturday, Richard returned with old photo albums from his high school days. The boys gathered around him on the couch while Sarah prepared dinner in the kitchen. "That's really you and Mom?" Michael asked, pointing to a photo of teenage Richard and Sarah at a school dance. "Yes, we were in the same math class," Richard said. "Your mom was the smartest person in the school." "She still helps us with homework," Marcus said proudly. As Richard drove home that evening, he thought about the small apartment and Sarah's exhausted face. He had missed 10 years with his sons. He couldn't change the past, but he could make their future better. His phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. He opened it to find a photo of Sarah arguing with a man outside her apartment building. The message read, "Do you really know who she is?" Richard stared at the photo, questions filling his mind. Who was this man, and what was Sarah hiding from him? Richard stared at the photo on his phone during the entire drive home. The image showed Sarah arguing with a tall man outside her apartment building. Their body language suggested a heated discussion. He couldn't see the man's face clearly, but something about the scene bothered him. The next morning, Victoria entered Richard's office with coffee and a smile. "Did you see what I sent?" she asked. "Who is that man?" Richard set down the design sketches he'd been pretending to review. "I don't know yet." Victoria sat on the edge of his desk. "My contact took the photo yesterday afternoon. Apparently, he visits regularly." Richard frowned. "Maybe he's just a friend." "Friends don't argue like that." Victoria sipped her coffee. "Don't you think it's strange she never mentioned him? What else might she be hiding?" "That's enough, Victoria." Richard stood up. "Sarah's personal life isn't our business." "It is, if it affects you and potentially the company." Victoria's voice softened. "I'm just looking out for you, Richard. These sudden children appearing, it seems convenient, doesn't it?" Richard wanted to dismiss Victoria's concerns, but doubt had already taken root. He checked his watch. He had promised to have dinner with Sarah and the boys tonight. At 5:30, Richard's phone rang. It was his biggest client, Gregory Thompson. "Richard, we have an emergency with my wife's anniversary ring," Gregory said. "The diamond is loose and I need it fixed by tomorrow morning." "But I have a dinner," Richard started. "It's our 20th anniversary, Richard. Please, I'll pay whatever it takes." Richard sighed and called Sarah. "I can't make it tonight," he explained. "Emergency with an important client." "The boys have been talking about it all day," Sarah said, disappointment clear in her voice. "Marcus made a special drawing for you. I'm sorry, I'll make it up to them this weekend." After hanging up, Richard felt terrible. He threw himself into fixing Gregory's ring, working late into the night. In Brightmoor, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his untouched plate growing cold. "He's not coming, is he?" he asked his mother. Sarah rubbed his shoulder. "He had to work late. It happens sometimes." "Will he come tomorrow?" Marcus's voice was small. "I don't know, sweetie." Michael slammed his fork down. "He should have come." He promised. "Richard has a business to run," Sarah explained. "Sometimes work has to come first." "You never miss dinner with us even when you're tired," Mason observed quietly. Sarah had no answer for that. The next day, Richard sent a large package of toys to the apartment with a note apologizing for missing dinner. Michael was thrilled with the new video game system, but Mason put his action figures aside without opening them. Marcus stared at the expensive art supplies, then placed his drawing in a drawer, unshared. At Harrington Jewelers, Victoria noticed Richard's distraction. "Still thinking about your new family?" she asked during a meeting. "I missed dinner with them last night. The boys were disappointed." Victoria nodded sympathetically. "It's difficult balancing everything, especially when Sarah seems to expect so much from you already." "She doesn't expect anything," Richard defended. "She's been raising them alone for 10 years. "Yes, and now suddenly she allows you into their lives." Victoria arranged papers on the table, just when they need expensive medication and better housing. Richard frowned. "What are you implying?" Before Victoria could answer, customers entered the meeting room, an older couple Richard recognized as regular clients. "Mr. and Mrs. Dawson, I didn't know you had an appointment today." "Victoria invited us to preview the new collection," Mrs. Dawson explained. As Victoria showed them jewelry pieces, Richard overheard their whispered conversation. "Is it true what people are saying?" Mrs. Dawson asked Victoria. "About Richard and that gold digger who trapped the Harrington heir?" "Such a sad situation," Victoria replied, just loud enough for Richard to hear. "3 children she kept hidden until she needed money." Richard stood up angrily. "That's completely false, Victoria." The Dawsons looked embarrassed. Victoria appeared surprised. "Richard, I was just explaining. Sarah Johnson is not a gold digger. Those boys are my sons, and I'm grateful to finally know them." Richard's voice was firm. "If that's a problem for anyone, they can take their business elsewhere." After the Dawsons left, Richard confronted Victoria. "Don't ever speak about Sarah that way again." "I'm sorry," Victoria said. "I was trying to manage the rumors." "People are talking, Richard." "Let them talk," Richard said, but doubt flickered in his mind. That evening, Richard visited Sarah's apartment with more gifts. He noticed she had put away the toys he'd sent earlier. "You don't need to bring presents every time," Sarah said. "I want to help," Richard insisted. "I could pay for a new apartment, better schools." "We don't need a new apartment," Sarah interrupted. "The boys need stability, not luxury." "At least let me pay off your bills," Richard suggested. Sarah shook her head. "I accept your help for Marcus's medical expenses because that's necessary. The rest we can manage." "Why won't you let me help more?" Richard asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "Because we've survived without it for 10 years, Sarah replied. "I don't want the boys to think money solves everything." Richard left feeling confused. If Sarah wasn't after his money, why did she refuse most of his help? Victoria's words echoed in his mind. Over the next 2 weeks, Richard established a routine of visiting the boys twice weekly for dinner and taking them out on Saturdays. The triplets adjusted differently to his presence. Michael eagerly showed Richard his school projects and talked constantly during visits. Mason remained quiet and watchful, answering questions politely but volunteering nothing. Marcus warmed to Richard gradually, especially when they played chess together. One evening after dinner, the boys went to their room to finish homework. Richard noticed Sarah seemed more tired than usual. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Just working extra shifts," Sarah explained. "The hospital offered overtime and we need new winter coats for the boys." "I could buy them coats," Richard offered immediately. Sarah sighed. "That's not the point, Richard." Richard frowned. "Then what is the point?" "You work yourself to exhaustion when I could easily help." "The point is independence," Sarah said. "I've raised these boys on my own. I can't just start depending on your money now." Richard was about to respond when he glanced out the window. A man stood on the sidewalk looking up at the apartment building, the same man from Victoria's photo. "Who is that?" Richard asked sharply. Sarah looked out. "That's just Frank." "Frank who? Why is he watching your apartment?" "He's not watching anything," Sarah said, annoyed. "He's probably here to see Mrs. Gonzalez next door." "I saw a photo of you arguing with him," Richard admitted. "Who is he to you?" Sarah turned to face Richard, anger flashing in her eyes. "You've been spying on me." "No, Richard stopped. Victoria thought it was suspicious. Victoria? Sarah laughed bitterly. Your snobbish marketing consultant is investigating me, and you're okay with that? I'm trying to protect my sons, Richard said defensively. Your sons? Sarah's voice rose. Where were you for the past 10 years while I worked 3 jobs to feed them? Where were you during the nights Marcus couldn't breathe and I had to choose between an emergency room visit or paying rent? That's not fair, Richard protested. I didn't know they existed. And now that you do, you think you can question my life? My friends? Sarah pointed to the door. I think you should leave. Not until you tell me who that man is, Richard insisted. Frank is my former landlord from our old apartment, Sarah snapped. He's been harassing me about damage to the unit that happened before we moved in. Victoria's precious photo probably caught me telling him to leave us alone. Richard felt embarrassment wash over him. Sarah, I'm sorry, I didn't… Just go, Sarah said, opening the apartment door, and tell Victoria to stay out of my business. As Richard walked to his car, he saw the triplets watching from their bedroom window. Michael waved, but Mason and Marcus quickly pulled him away from the glass. Richard drove away, feeling horrible. He had allowed Victoria's insinuations to make him doubt Sarah, who had done nothing but raise his children well despite difficult circumstances. When Richard returned to his penthouse, his phone buzzed with a message from Victoria. DNA test results back on the coffee cup samples. You need to see this immediately. Richard stared at the message in shock. DNA test? What had Victoria done now? Richard stared at Victoria's message, his hands shaking. DNA test? How could she have done such a thing without his permission? He called her immediately. What do you mean by DNA test? He demanded when she answered. Meet me at the office, Victoria said calmly. This isn't a phone conversation. 20 minutes later, Richard stormed into the jewelry store. Victoria waited in his office with a manila folder on his desk. You had no right, Richard said, closing the door behind him. Victoria straightened her perfect black blazer. I did what was necessary to protect you. Remember when the boys visited the store? I collected their disposable cups after they had water. It wasn't difficult to get samples. That's illegal and completely unethical. Richard's voice rose. Perhaps, Victoria admitted, but necessary. Look at these results. She opened the folder and placed 3 papers on the desk. Richard reluctantly looked down. The tests show a 99.9% likelihood that Michael and Mason are your biological children, Victoria said, pointing to the first 2 reports. But Marcus, she tapped the 3rd paper, is not a match. Richard sank into his chair. This can't be right. It is right, Victoria insisted. Marcus is not your son. Sarah lied to you. Richard stared at the results, feeling sick. Get out, Victoria. Now. Richard, you need to… Get out! He shouted. After Victoria left, Richard sat alone for hours. The test results spread before him. Marcus was not his biological son. The boy who needed expensive medication, the one with asthma, wasn't his. Had Sarah known all along? Was this some kind of elaborate scheme? For the next week, Richard avoided Sarah's calls and messages. He canceled plans with the boys, claiming business emergencies. He needed time to think, to process this information. Sarah tried calling Richard every day for a week. He's still not answering, she told Michael, who asked about their Saturday plans. Did we do something wrong? Michael asked. No, sweetie. He's probably just busy with work. Marcus sat on the couch, hugging his knees to his chest. Is it because I got sick last time? I told him I was sorry about using my inhaler so much. No! Sarah sat beside Marcus and put her arm around him. Your asthma is not your fault. Never think that. Mason watched from the kitchen table. He's not coming back. You don't know that, Michael argued. Yes, I do, Mason said firmly. Adults always leave. Sarah felt her heart breaking for her sons. She had been right to protect them, to be cautious about letting Richard into their lives. She'd only needed his help for Marcus's medication. Now he was gone, and her boys were hurt. At Harrington Jewelers, Victoria began planning a charity gala. She entered Richard's office with a stack of invitations. "The annual Harrington Foundation Gala is in 2 weeks," she announced. "I've arranged everything." Richard barely looked up from his computer. "Cancel it. I'm not in the mood for a party." "We can't cancel," Victoria said smoothly. "The mayor is attending. So are all our major clients. It would damage our reputation." Richard sighed. "Fine. Handle it yourself." "One more thing," Victoria added. "I've invited Sarah Johnson." Richard's head snapped up. "Why would you do that?" "This year's charity focus is children's asthma research," Victoria explained with a small smile. "It seemed appropriate, given her son's condition." "Your real sons will benefit from your generosity, even if Marcus is not actually yours." Richard wanted to argue, but Victoria left before he could respond. He hadn't told her about his fight with Sarah, about his accusations regarding Frank. Now Victoria had invited Sarah to the gala. Would she even come? Sarah received the invitation 3 days later. She almost threw it away until she noticed the words, "Supporting Childhood Asthma Research," printed at the bottom. The gala would raise money for the exact cause that affected Marcus. She decided to attend, not for Richard, but for her son. On the night of the gala, Sarah wore her only formal dress, a simple black one she'd bought years ago for a cousin's wedding. She arranged for Mrs. Gonzalez to watch the boys and took the bus downtown. Harrington Jewelers had been transformed. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Tables covered in white cloth displayed expensive jewelry. Well-dressed people filled the space, drinking champagne and examining the displays. Sarah felt immediately out of place. Women in designer dresses glanced at her with obvious judgment. She considered leaving until she spotted Richard across the room. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. When he saw her, his face showed surprise, then something like guilt. Before Sarah could approach him, Victoria appeared at her side. "Sarah! How nice of you to come," Victoria said loudly. "Richard, look who's here." Richard walked over slowly. "Sarah, I didn't think you'd come." "The invitation mentioned asthma research," Sarah explained stiffly. "I came for Marcus." Victoria's smile widened. "Yes, Marcus. Your son with asthma. How is he doing with those expensive medications Richard has been paying for?" Sarah frowned at Victoria's tone. "He's much better, thank you." "Wonderful!" Victoria touched Richard's arm. "Richard has been so generous, especially considering—" "Victoria," Richard warned, "especially considering he's not actually the boy's father," Victoria finished. The people nearby fell silent. Sarah's face paled. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Victoria looked around, clearly enjoying the attention. "Oh, you didn't know we did DNA testing?" The coffee cups from the boys' visit provided excellent samples. Michael and Mason are definitely Richard's sons. But Marcus? Not even close. Gasps and whispers filled the room. Sarah stood frozen, her worst fears realized in this public humiliation. Richard stepped forward. "Victoria, that's enough. This is a private matter." "Private?" Victoria laughed. "You're Detroit's most eligible bachelor, suddenly saddled with 3 children, one of whom isn't even yours. The public has a right to know that Sarah Johnson has been deceiving you." Sarah turned to leave, tears threatening to fall. "Sarah, wait!" Richard called, following her through the crowd. Victoria raised her voice to make sure everyone heard. "Richard, are you certain they're even yours? How do you know she's telling the truth about any of this?" Richard and Sarah both stopped. He turned to face Victoria, his expression filled with rage. "Those boys are my sons," he said firmly. "All 3 of them, and I won't let you or anyone else suggest otherwise." The crowd murmured in surprise. Victoria's smug smile faltered. Richard took Sarah's arm gently. Let's go somewhere private." They walked out into the parking lot behind the store. The night was cold, and Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. "You knew?" she asked, her voice shaking. "You knew about Marcus and didn't say anything?" "I just found out last week," Richard admitted. "Victoria had the tests done without my knowledge." "So that's why you disappeared?" Sarah nodded slowly. "You found out Marcus isn't biologically yours, and you left." "I needed time to think," Richard said. "And what did you decide?" Sarah asked bitterly. "That 2 out of 3 was good enough?" Richard looked ashamed. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I should have talked to you instead of avoiding you. You should have trusted me." Sarah's voice broke. "You have no idea what I've been through, what the boys have been through." "Then tell me," Richard said. "Tell me the truth." Sarah took a deep breath, tears streaming down her face. "During senior year, I was assaulted at Jason Miller's party. I never told anyone, not even you. When I found out I was pregnant, I couldn't be sure who the biological father was." Richard's face showed shock, then deep sorrow. "Sarah, I had no idea. I knew I wanted all 3 babies," Sarah continued. "They're brothers, regardless of DNA. I've never treated Marcus differently. He doesn't know, and neither do Michael and Mason. They're triplets. They're family." Richard moved closer to Sarah. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you. And I'm sorry I doubted you. I understand if you only want a relationship with Michael and Mason," Sarah said, wiping her tears. "But please, don't tell Marcus why. He wouldn't understand." Richard reached for Sarah's hand. His next words surprised her. "They're all my sons," he said firmly. "All 3 of them. Biology doesn't make a family. Commitment does." Sarah looked at him questioningly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to be a father to all 3 boys," Richard explained. "If you'll let me, I want to be part of their lives, Marcus included, especially Marcus." Inside the gala, Victoria watched through the window as Richard and Sarah talked in the parking lot. Her plan to expose Sarah had backfired completely. Instead of driving Richard away from the Johnson family, she had somehow pushed him closer to them. Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from the board chairman. "Meeting tomorrow regarding your employment status." Richard's request. She knew then that her victory had turned to defeat. But Victoria Westfield wasn't one to accept defeat easily. She would find another way to protect Harrington Jewelers from Sarah Johnson and her sons. Victoria watched from the window as Richard and Sarah continued talking in the parking lot. Her plan had failed, and now she needed to protect herself. She quickly returned to the gala, smiling at guests as if nothing had happened. Outside in the cold parking lot, Richard looked directly into Sarah's eyes. "I want to be their father. All of them," he repeated. "Not just because they share my DNA, but because they deserve a father who chooses them." Sarah wiped away her tears. "You say that now, but—" "No buts," Richard interrupted. "I made a terrible mistake disappearing this past week. I let doubt creep in because of Victoria's manipulation. That ends tonight." Richard took out his phone and typed a quick message. Seconds later, Victoria's phone buzzed inside the gala. "What are you doing?" Sarah asked. "Fixing my first mistake," Richard said. "Let's go back inside." They walked back into Harrington Jewelers just as Victoria read Richard's message. Her face paled. Richard walked directly to her, with Sarah a few steps behind. "Victoria," Richard said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "you're fired. Clear out your office tomorrow morning." Victoria's perfect composure cracked. "Richard, you can't." "I can and I am," Richard said firmly. "The DNA tests were unauthorized and illegal." Publicly humiliating Sarah was unforgivable. "I was protecting you and the company," Victoria protested. "No, you were protecting yourself and your position." Richard turned to the stunned guests. "I apologize to everyone for this unfortunate scene. The gala will continue and all proceeds will still go to childhood asthma research." As security escorted Victoria out, whispers filled the room. Richard took Sarah's hand. "Let's get out of here," he suggested. "We have a lot to talk about." They drove to a quiet diner that stayed open all night. Over coffee, they talked for hours about the boys, the future, and how to move forward. "The boys don't need to know about Marcus's biological situation yet," Sarah said. "They're too young to understand." Richard nodded. "I agree. What matters is that they're brothers, and I'm committed to all three of them equally." "I worry about Marcus," Sarah admitted. "If he ever finds out, he might feel different, less connected." "We'll tell them when they're older," Richard promised. "Together, when they're ready to hear it." The next morning, Richard met with his lawyers at their downtown office. "I want to legally recognize all three boys as my sons," he told the gray-haired attorney across the desk. "Full legal rights, name changes if they want them, everything." The lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, looked over his glasses. "Even the one who is not biologically yours?" "Yes," Richard said firmly. "All three." "We can arrange it," Mr. Jenkins said, making notes. "It will require Sarah's cooperation, of course." "She'll cooperate," Richard assured him. "She's been raising them alone for 10 years. She deserves support." 3 days later, Sarah sat with Richard in her small apartment while the boys were at school. "The lawyers say the paperwork will take a few weeks," Richard explained. "But once it's done, I'll be legally recognized as their father." Sarah nodded, still looking uncertain. "And child support?" "Will be substantial," Richard confirmed. "But Sarah, I want to do more than just send money." "What do you mean?" Richard leaned forward. "After the gala, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus and his medical needs, about all the families in Brightmoor facing similar problems." "That's life for a lot of people," Sarah said. "Medical debt, choosing between medicine and food." "It shouldn't be," Richard said passionately. "Harrington Jewelers has always been about luxury, about serving the wealthy. My parents built it that way. But what if part of it could serve families who need help with medical expenses?" Sarah looked surprised. "What are you suggesting?" "A foundation," Richard said, "using part of the store space and a portion of our profits to provide medical assistance to uninsured children." That's a big change," Sarah said cautiously. "I know." Richard smiled. "But meeting you and the boys has changed me. I've seen how hard you work, how you navigate the healthcare system. I want to help other families like yours." "Your wealthy customers might not like sharing space with a charity," Sarah warned. "Then they can shop elsewhere," Richard said simply. Later that week, Richard spent an entire day in Brightmoor. He walked the streets, visited the community center, and talked with families at the local clinic. He saw children with untreated illnesses, parents working multiple jobs, and a community struggling without resources. That evening, he joined Sarah and the triplets for dinner. The boys had grown used to his presence at their table twice a week. "I beat my math test," Michael announced proudly, showing Richard his paper with a large A written in red. "That's excellent," Richard praised. "Your mom told me you've been studying hard." Marcus showed Richard his science project about the human respiratory system. The teacher said it was very detailed. "I know a lot about lungs now." Mason quietly ate his spaghetti, watching the interactions around him. He still kept his distance from Richard, but the open hostility had faded. After dinner, while the boys did homework, Richard showed Sarah some sketches he'd made. "This is how we could remodel the store," he explained. "Half would remain Harrington Jewelers, and half would become foundation offices." Sarah examined the drawings. "This is really happening?" "If you help me," Richard said, "I need someone who understands the healthcare system from a parent's perspective, someone organized and efficient." Sarah shook her head. "I'm just a hospital receptionist and office cleaner." "You're someone who managed to raise 3 amazing boys while working multiple jobs and navigating a complicated medical system," Richard corrected. "You have exactly the skills this foundation needs." Are you offering me a job? Sarah asked, surprised. I'm asking you to run the foundation, Richard clarified, as the director. Sarah laughed in disbelief. I don't have the qualifications for that. You have the most important qualification, Richard insisted. You've lived it. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Richard visited the apartment regularly. He helped the boys with homework and joined them for dinner. On weekends, he took them to parks, museums, and sometimes to his workshop at the store. Michael discovered a love for jewelry design, spending hours at Richard's workbench drawing and learning about gemstones. Marcus's health improved with the proper medication, and he started joining his school's chess club. Even Mason began to warm up to Richard, asking thoughtful questions about the foundation plans. One Saturday, Richard took the boys fishing at Belle Isle Park. As Michael chased ducks along the shore and Marcus examined bugs near the water, Mason sat quietly next to Richard with his fishing pole. Are you really going to stay? Mason asked suddenly. Richard looked at the serious 10-year-old. Yes, Mason. I'm really going to stay. Even though Marcus isn't your real son? Richard almost dropped his fishing pole. Who told you that? No one, Mason said. I heard Victoria at the gala. I followed you and Mom outside. Richard took a deep breath. Mason, listen to me. Marcus is my real son. So are you and Michael. But the DNA is just science, Richard said. Family is about who you choose to love and protect. I choose all three of you, always. Mason considered this for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but don't tell Marcus I know. It would make him sad. I promise, Richard agreed, amazed at the quiet wisdom of this child. Back at the apartment, Sarah and Richard worked late into the evening on foundation plans. They decided to name it the Marcus Foundation, in honor of the boy whose medical needs had brought them back together. I've been thinking, Richard said as they finished. This apartment is too small for 3 growing boys, and I live 30 minutes away, which makes it hard to be here for dinner and homework. What are you suggesting? Sarah asked cautiously. I found a house near your new apartment in Greenlawn, Richard explained. Nothing fancy, but with 4 bedrooms and a yard. It's 5 minutes from where you'll be living. You're moving to Greenlawn? Sarah was shocked. What about your penthouse downtown? I don't need a penthouse, Richard said. I need to be near my family. Sarah looked at the foundation plans spread across her kitchen table, at the sketches of the Marcus Foundation logo Richard had designed. In just a few weeks, her life had changed completely. The man who had disappeared 11 years ago was now creating a foundation named after her son and moving to be near them. Why are you doing all this? Sarah asked. The foundation, moving, everything? Richard smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that matters. As they worked, the security cameras at Harrington Jewelers captured someone entering the building with a key, Victoria returning with determination written across her face. She walked directly to Richard's office, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. Victoria moved through Richard's office with purpose, using her old key that security hadn't yet deactivated. She went straight to his computer, but found it locked. Instead, she opened file cabinets, photographing documents about the foundation plans. She also took photos of the preliminary designs for the Marcus Foundation logo. This isn't over, Richard, she whispered to the empty office. Not by a long shot. The following morning, Victoria met 3 women for breakfast at the Oak Hills Country Club, the most exclusive club in Detroit. These women, Diane, Eleanor, and Patricia, were married to powerful men and controlled Detroit's social scene. I'm so glad you could meet me on such short notice, Victoria said, stirring her coffee. I've been worried about Richard Harrington. We heard about that dreadful scene at the gala, Eleanor said. Is it true? He has 3 secret children? Victoria nodded sadly. I tried to protect him. The woman, Sarah Johnson, is from Brightmoor. She kept those boys hidden for 10 years until one needed expensive medication. How opportunistic, Patricia commented. The worst part, Victoria leaned forward, lowering her voice, is that one boy isn't even Richard's biological child, yet he's giving this woman control of a foundation that will take over half of Harrington Jewelers. Diane gasped. Half the store? Is he losing his mind? I fear he's being manipulated, Victoria sighed. His father would be devastated to see the business he built being dismantled for a woman Richard barely knows. By afternoon, the rumors had spread throughout Detroit's elite social circles. At his office, Richard received 3 phone calls from concerned investors. The third call was from Gerald Thompson, his biggest client. Richard, I've known your family for 20 years, Gerald said. Is it true you're converting retail space into a charity office? Yes, Richard confirmed. The Marcus Foundation will help children access medical care. Noble, but is it wise? Your father built that business on exclusivity. Times change, Gerald. I hope you'll support this new direction. I'll need to think about it, Gerald said before hanging up. Richard placed his phone down just as his assistant Janet entered. Mr. Harrington, Mrs. Bellwood called to cancel her appointment. She said she'll be purchasing her anniversary jewelry from Henderson's instead. Richard frowned. Did she say why? Janet looked uncomfortable. She mentioned something about not supporting businesses that, are run by people with questionable judgment. That evening, Sarah was shopping for school supplies when she overheard 2 women talking nearby. That's her, one whispered loudly. The gold digger who trapped Richard Harrington. Sarah grabbed what she needed and hurried to the checkout, her cheeks burning. The cashier, who had always been friendly before, barely looked at her. When Sarah arrived at Richard's temporary foundation office the next day, she found him reviewing architectural plans. We have a problem, she said without greeting. People are talking about us all over the city. Richard nodded grimly. Victoria has been busy. 3 clients canceled orders today. 2 board members called asking about rumors of financial instability. Maybe I should step back from the foundation, Sarah suggested. If I'm causing you to lose business… Absolutely not, Richard interrupted. Their disapproval proves exactly why this foundation is necessary. These people have no idea what families like yours face every day. Sarah touched Richard's arm. I appreciate that. But this is your family business. And those are my sons, Richard said firmly. All 3 of them. The business will survive. At Franklin Elementary School, the triplets were experiencing their own challenges. During lunch, Marcus sat alone at a table when a 5th grader named Dylan approached. Is it true your mom tricked some rich guy into thinking he's your dad? Dylan asked loudly. Marcus looked confused. What? My mom said your mom is a gold digger, and you're not even the rich guy's real kid. Marcus's eyes filled with tears. He didn't understand what Dylan meant, but he knew it was meant to hurt him. Michael, seeing his brother's distress, rushed over. Leave him alone! Why should I? Dylan taunted. He's not even your full brother. Mason appeared beside Michael. Yes, he is. We're triplets. Now go away. A teacher intervened, but the damage was done. When Sarah picked the boys up after school, Marcus was unusually quiet. What's wrong, sweetie? She asked as they walked home. Mom, what's a gold digger? Marcus asked. Sarah stopped walking. Where did you hear that word? Dylan at school said you were one, Marcus explained. And he said I'm not really Richard's son like Michael and Mason. Sarah knelt to look Marcus in the eyes. Dylan was being mean and telling lies. You are my son, and Michael and Mason are your brothers. That's all that matters right now. That night, Sarah called Richard and told him what happened. We need to move them to a new school, Richard said immediately. I'll make arrangements. Changing schools won't solve everything, Sarah argued. Victoria has made sure everyone in Detroit knows our business. Then we need to give them a better story to talk about, Richard replied. The following week, Richard closed on a modest 4-bedroom house in the Greenlawn neighborhood. He invited Sarah and the boys to see it before he moved in. "This is where you'll live?" Michael asked, running through the empty rooms. "It's cool, but kinda small compared to your apartment downtown." "I prefer this," Richard said. "It's closer to your new apartment." Mason inspected the backyard. "There's a tree we could put a swing on." "Absolutely," Richard agreed. "And maybe build a treehouse too." While the boys explored, Sarah checked her phone. She had 3 missed calls from the hospital where she worked. "I need to return these," she said worriedly. When she called, her supervisor informed her that some patients had requested not to work with her. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but your situation has become disruptive," her supervisor explained. "Perhaps you should take some time off until things settle down." Sarah hung up, fighting tears. "They want me to take leave from the hospital. Patients have complained about me." Richard's face hardened. "Victoria's rumors are affecting your job now." "What if this never stops?" Sarah asked. "What if the Foundation faces the same resistance?" Richard thought for a moment. "Then we need allies, people who can vouch for what we're trying to do." The next day, Richard visited Dr. Wilson, Marcus's specialist. "I'd like your professional opinion on something," Richard said, explaining the Foundation concept. Dr. Wilson's eyes lit up. "This could help hundreds of children. Early intervention saves lives and reduces long-term healthcare costs." "Would you be willing to speak publicly about that?" Richard asked. "Absolutely. I have data that proves it." Meanwhile, Victoria arranged a lunch meeting with Harold Winters, the most conservative member of Harrington Jewelers' board of directors. "Harold, I'm concerned about the company's future," Victoria began. "Richard is making decisions based on emotion, not business sense." Harold frowned. "Converting valuable retail space does seem questionable." "It's more than questionable," Victoria insisted. "It's reckless. He's being manipulated by a woman who lied about her child's paternity." Victoria slid a folder across the table containing the DNA test results. "Richard knows about this and still plans to move forward," she said. "This foundation is a personal matter, not a business decision. As a board member, you have a responsibility to protect the company." Harold reviewed the documents with growing concern. "I'll speak with the other board members. We may need to call an emergency meeting." Victoria smiled. "I think that would be wise." That evening, the triplets helped Sarah pack boxes for their move to the new apartment. Richard had found them a 3-bedroom unit in a safe building in Greenlawn just 2 blocks from his new house. "Will we still see Dad every day when we move?" Michael asked, using the term Dad for the first time. Sarah paused her packing. "You think of Richard as your dad now?" Michael nodded. "He acts like a dad. He helps with homework and takes us places and cares if we're sick." "He's okay," Mason admitted, which was high praise from him. Marcus looked uncertain. "But Dylan said I'm not really—" "Dylan was wrong," Sarah said firmly. "Richard cares about all 3 of you equally." As if summoned by their conversation, Richard knocked on the apartment door. His expression was serious. "We need to talk," he told Sarah after greeting the boys. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. They're voting on whether I can continue as CEO." "Can they do that?" Sarah asked. "Yes. They think the foundation is a poor business decision." "This is because of me, isn't it?" Sarah's voice trembled. "It's because of Victoria," Richard corrected. "She's convinced them I'm being manipulated." "What will you do?" "Fight," Richard said simply. "Will you come with me tomorrow?" "The boys too? I want the board to see who this foundation will help." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "We'll be there." Richard checked his phone as it buzzed with a text from Harold Winters. "Victoria has provided compelling evidence that this foundation is a personal matter, not a business decision. I'm sorry, but tomorrow's vote won't go your way." Richard stared at Harold's text message for a long time. The board had already made up their minds before even hearing his side. He needed to prepare for the biggest fight of his business career. The next morning, Richard arrived at Harrington Jewelers 2 hours early. He reviewed his notes and practiced his presentation one final time. The future of his family business, and his ability to help families like Sarah's depended on today's meeting. Outside his window, he noticed something unexpected. Dozens of people were gathering on the sidewalk in front of the store. They carried signs that read, "Support the Marcus Foundation," and "Healthcare for all children." Richard recognized some faces from Brightmoor and surrounding neighborhoods. His office phone rang. It was Janet at the front desk. "Mr. Harrington, there's a woman named Mrs. Gonzalez here. She says she organized a demonstration to support your foundation." Richard went downstairs and found Mrs. Gonzalez, Sarah's neighbor. "Sarah mentioned your meeting today," she explained. "We wanted to show the fancy board members that real people need this foundation." Richard was deeply moved. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Mrs. Gonzalez patted his arm. "Just win the vote." At 10 o'clock, board members began arriving. They looked uncomfortable passing through the crowd of demonstrators. Victoria arrived early wearing a perfect black suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She nodded confidently to Richard as she entered the boardroom. Richard checked his watch. Sarah should have arrived by now with the triplets. He hoped she hadn't changed her mind. Harold Winters approached Richard in the hallway. He was a gray-haired man in his 60s who had been a friend of Richard's father. "This is quite a spectacle," Harold said, gesturing toward the window. "Did you organize this demonstration?" "No," Richard replied honestly. "These families came on their own." Harold frowned. "Richard, I've known you since you were a boy. Your father built this business on exclusivity and luxury. This foundation idea goes against everything Harrington Jewelers represents." "Maybe it's time for Harrington Jewelers to represent something more," Richard suggested. Inside the boardroom, 6 board members were seated around a large table. Victoria sat at one end, arranging papers in front of her. Richard would normally sit at the head of the table as CEO, but today he felt more like a defendant. Janet entered. "Mr. Harrington, Sarah Johnson is here with her sons." "Send them in, please," Richard said. Sarah entered the boardroom wearing a simple blue dress. The triplets followed in matching white shirts and dark pants. Behind them came an Asian woman in a doctor's coat. The board chairman, Walter Pierce, looked annoyed. "Mr. Harrington, this is a closed meeting." "These people are central to the matter we're discussing," Richard argued. "I want them to stay." "This is highly irregular," Walter protested. "So is voting to remove me as CEO because I want to help sick children," Richard countered. Walter sighed. "Very well, let's begin. Ms. Westfield has requested time to present her concerns about the foundation proposal." Victoria stood and walked to the front of the room with practiced confidence. "Board members, I come before you today deeply concerned about the future of Harrington Jewelers," she began. "Richard's plan to convert half our store into a medical foundation is not just bad business. It's the result of manipulation." She gestured toward Sarah. Sarah Johnson appeared suddenly in Richard's life, claiming these boys are his sons from a relationship 11 years ago. Victoria placed documents on the table. "These are DNA test results showing that while 2 of the boys are indeed Richard's biological children, Marcus, the sick one Richard is spending money on, is not his son." The board members murmured among themselves, looking at Sarah with suspicion. "Furthermore," Victoria continued, "I've prepared sales projections showing the damage this foundation will cause." She distributed more papers. "Converting half our space will reduce jewelry sales by at least 40%. Several major clients have already expressed their intention to shop elsewhere." Victoria turned to Richard with false sympathy. "I understand Richard feels guilty for missing years of his sons' lives. But destroying his family's business is not the solution." Walter nodded. "Thank you, Miss Westfield. Richard, would you like to respond?" Richard stood. He looked at Sarah and the boys, then faced the board. "First, let me address the DNA test that Victoria obtained illegally," he began. "Yes, I am not Marcus's biological father, but I am his father in every way that matters. All 3 boys are my sons, and I make no distinction between them." Richard picked up the sales projections Victoria had distributed. These numbers are based on the assumption that our customers will abandon us if we show social responsibility. But that assumption is wrong. Richard passed out his own papers. These are our sales figures from the past month, since we announced the foundation. Overall store revenue has increased by 12%. The board members looked surprised. Customers aren't leaving, Richard continued. Many are spending more because they want to support our mission, and we've gained new customers who never considered shopping here before. Dr. Wilson stepped forward. May I speak? I'm Dr. Emily Chen, Marcus's specialist. Walter hesitated, then nodded. Early intervention in childhood medical conditions like asthma doesn't just save lives, it saves money, Dr. Chen explained. When children receive proper treatment early, they avoid expensive emergency room visits and hospitalizations. The foundation Richard proposes would be both compassionate and economically sound. Richard turned to Sarah. Sarah Johnson is not manipulating me. She's a remarkable woman who raised 3 amazing boys while working multiple jobs and navigating a healthcare system that failed them repeatedly. She has more organizational skill and practical knowledge than any consultant we could hire. Victoria stood again. This is all very touching, but the fact remains that Richard is making business decisions based on personal feelings. He's trying to ease his guilt by creating this foundation. The room fell silent. The board members looked uncomfortable. Richard was about to respond when a small voice spoke up. That's not true. Everyone turned to look at Mason, who had stood up from his chair. The quiet triplet rarely spoke and never in front of strangers. Mason, Sarah whispered. You don't have to. Yes, I do, Mason said firmly. He looked directly at the board members. My mom works 2 jobs. Sometimes she doesn't eat dinner so we can have enough food. She never complains. She helps everyone, not just us. Mason pointed at Victoria. That lady said my mom is tricking Richard for money. But my mom didn't want his help at first. She only took money for Marcus's medicine because he couldn't breathe. The boardroom was completely silent now. Richard is nice, Mason continued. He helps us with homework. He moved to a small house near us instead of staying in his fancy apartment. He doesn't buy us toys all the time because Mom says that's not what being a dad means. Mason looked at each board member. The foundation isn't about guilt. It's about helping kids like my brother. If you don't understand that, you're not very smart business people. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Harold Winters started to laugh. Well, I think we've been properly put in our place, Harold said. The boy makes an excellent point. Walter cleared his throat. Thank you, young man. Your perspective is illuminating. Victoria looked furious. You can't possibly be swayed by a child's emotional appeal. Actually, Walter said, I'm swayed by the sales figures and Dr. Chen's medical expertise. And yes, by this young man's insights as well. Harold nodded. Richard's father built this business to create something lasting. Times change, and businesses must change with them. Walter looked around the table. I believe we're ready to vote on whether to support Richard's continued leadership and his foundation proposal. Victoria gathered her papers, her hands shaking with anger. This is a mistake you'll regret. Walter ignored her. All in favor of supporting Richard Harrington and the Marcus Foundation, please raise your hand. Richard held his breath as the board members considered. Harold raised his hand first, then another member and another. When Walter raised his own hand, the count stood at 4 votes in favor. All opposed? Walter asked. 2 hands went up, including the member sitting closest to Victoria. Walter nodded. 4-3 in favor. Richard Harrington remains CEO with full authority to proceed with the Marcus Foundation. Relief washed over Richard's face. Sarah squeezed his hand under the table. Victoria stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The remaining board members approached Richard to shake his hand and meet the triplets. Harold pulled Richard aside. "Your father would be proud of you today, not for winning the vote, but for standing up for what you believe in. That's what he always did, in his own way." As the boardroom emptied, Richard found Mason standing by himself near the window, watching the demonstrators outside. "Thank you," Richard said. "That was incredibly brave." Mason shrugged. "I just told the truth." "Sometimes that's the bravest thing of all," Richard replied. Outside the Harrington building, Victoria stood on the sidewalk, watching the celebrating crowd. Her perfect composure had cracked, but determination still burned in her eyes. This fight wasn't over. She pulled out her phone and made a call. "It's me," she said. "I need your help with something. It's about Richard Harrington and his new family." Victoria walked briskly away from Harrington Jewelers, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care how you do it, Jeffrey," she said to the reporter on the other end. "Just make sure the story runs in tomorrow's paper. The public deserves to know the truth." Inside the boardroom, the celebration continued. Board members congratulated Richard and spoke kindly to the triplets. Dr. Chen discussed medical partnerships with Harold Winters, who seemed genuinely interested in the foundation's potential. "We did it," Richard whispered to Sarah as they watched everyone interact. "Mason did it," Sarah corrected with a smile. "I've never heard him speak so much at once." Mason stood nearby, looking embarrassed by the attention, but proud. "Michael kept retelling the story to anyone who would listen, and then my brother totally told those adults what's what." Even Marcus seemed happier, his breathing easier with the new medication. Over the next week, Harrington Jewelers buzzed with activity. Construction crews arrived to transform half the store into the foundation's offices. Richard worked closely with architects to ensure the space would be welcoming to families seeking help. The jewelry showroom and foundation entrance should be separate but equal, Richard instructed the designers. "I don't want anyone feeling like they're coming through the back door." Sarah, who had officially accepted the position as foundation director, reviewed medical assistance applications from families. She worked from a temporary desk in Richard's office. "We already have 27 families who need immediate help," she told Richard. "Most of them are for asthma medications, diabetes supplies, and specialized equipment." "Approve them all," Richard said without hesitation. "That's over $30,000 in assistance," Sarah cautioned. "It's a start," Richard replied. "We'll help as many as we can." Harold Winters became an unexpected ally. He arranged meetings with healthcare administrators and insurance company executives, using his connections to create partnerships for the foundation. "My grandson has type 1 diabetes," Harold explained to Sarah after one such meeting. "I understand the healthcare maze better than most board members." The story of Richard Harrington discovering his triplet sons and creating a foundation named after the boy who wasn't biologically his caught public imagination. Several journalists requested interviews, which Richard and Sarah carefully managed to protect the boy's privacy. "We'll do one interview," Richard decided. "With the Detroit Tribune. They've been fair in their reporting." The Tribune article titled, "Detroit Jewelry Heir Transforms Business After Finding Family," told their story with respect and accuracy. It focused on the foundation's mission rather than the personal details. Donations began arriving from people touched by their story. Not all press was positive, however. One morning, Richard found Sarah staring at a tabloid newspaper in the temporary foundation office. "Harrington heir raises another man's child. DNA test reveals shocking truth," the headline screamed. "Victoria," Richard said, taking the paper from Sarah's hands. "She revealed everything about Marcus," Sarah whispered. "What if he sees this? What if the other boys see it?" Richard scanned the article, which quoted anonymous sources close to the family and included details only Victoria would know. "We need to address this directly," Richard decided, "not hide from it." They crafted a simple statement: family transcends biology. Richard Harrington is proud to be father to all 3 of his sons and considers them equal in every way. The Marcus Foundation was named to honor the strength of a child who has faced health challenges with remarkable courage. Their honest response transformed potential scandal into a story of inspiration. More donations arrived, including a significant one from Gerald Thompson, Richard's initially hesitant client. "My wife was adopted," Gerald told Richard when he delivered his check. "Your statement about family transcending biology meant a lot to her." 6 weeks after the board meeting, the renovation was complete. The right side of the building remained Harrington Jewelers, with its elegant displays and luxury items. The left side now housed the Marcus Foundation, with a bright, welcoming entrance and comfortable offices. Sarah stood in her new office the night before the official opening, amazed at the transformation. Her desk faced a large window overlooking Detroit. Behind her, framed photos of the triplets sat beside her degrees. She had finally hung her associate's degree and hospital certifications with pride. Richard knocked on her open door. "What do you think?" "It's perfect," Sarah said. "I never imagined working in a place like this." "You earned it," Richard assured her. "The foundation is already helping families before we've even officially opened." Sarah nodded. 15 children have received medication they couldn't otherwise afford. 3 have gotten specialized equipment. "And we've just begun," Richard said. Outside in the main foundation area, workers installed the final touches. A special display case stood in the center of the reception area, waiting for tomorrow's unveiling. The triplets had adjusted well to their new lives. They loved their new school in Greenlawn, where nobody knew their complicated history. Marcus's health had improved dramatically with consistent care. His last checkup with Dr. Chen showed the best lung function he'd had in years. Michael had discovered a true talent for jewelry design. Richard had set up a small workbench for him at home, where the boy spent hours creating increasingly sophisticated pieces. "Look what I made," Michael proudly showed Sarah one evening, presenting a simple silver bracelet with 3 small connected circles. "It's beautiful," Sarah said. "The 3 circles are for us triplets," Michael explained, "always connected." Mason, inspired by his unexpected speech at the board meeting, had joined his school's debate team. His quiet, thoughtful nature made him a surprisingly effective debater. Mason won his first debate competition, Sarah told Richard during their daily foundation meeting. He argued for increased funding for school lunch programs. "That doesn't surprise me," Richard smiled. "When Mason speaks, people listen." The morning of the foundation's grand opening arrived sunny and clear. Sarah woke early to ensure the triplets' special outfits were ready. As she made breakfast, her phone chimed with a text message from an unknown number. "What Richard doesn't know will destroy everything you've built. Meet me tomorrow before the launch if you want to protect your family." Sarah's hand trembled as she read the message. Victoria. It had to be. She considered telling Richard, but decided against it. He had enough pressure today with the opening. At 9 o'clock, Sarah arrived at the foundation with the triplets. Richard greeted them at the private entrance, looking handsome in a new suit. "Everything looks amazing," Sarah said, trying to hide her worry about the text message. "Wait until you see inside," Richard replied. "I added something special last night." Guests would arrive at 10 o'clock for the ceremony. Media had been invited along with healthcare partners, donors, and families who would benefit from the foundation's work. Even the mayor of Detroit planned to attend. Inside, Richard led Sarah to the display case in the reception area. It was covered with a velvet cloth. "What's this?" Sarah asked. Richard smiled. "A surprise. We'll unveil it during the ceremony." Sarah nodded, then checked her watch. "I need to step outside for a minute. Last-minute jitters." "Of course. Take your time." Sarah walked to the back of the building where deliveries were made. Her heart pounded as she waited. At precisely 9:30, a sleek black car pulled up, and Victoria stepped out. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Victoria said, looking polished as ever in a designer suit. "What do you want?" Sarah asked directly. Victoria's perfect smile didn't reach her eyes. "Just to talk." About Richard. About things he doesn't know. If you're planning to reveal more about Marcus's paternity, go ahead. We've already addressed it publicly. Oh, this isn't about Marcus, Victoria said. This is about Richard's parents. About what really happened 11 years ago. Sarah frowned. What are you talking about? Richard believes his parents kept him from you, that they intercepted your messages. Victoria's smile widened. But what if that's not entirely true? What if there's more to the story that would make him question everything, including you? Sarah stared at Victoria, trying to determine if she was bluffing. You're desperate. You have nothing. Don't I? Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. These are letters Richard wrote to you after he left for Stanford. Letters his parents gave me when I worked for them. Letters you supposedly never received. Sarah's blood ran cold as she looked at the familiar handwriting on the envelope Victoria held. Richard had written to her. His parents had kept his letters from her. Why would you show me these now? Sarah asked. Victoria's expression changed, showing real emotion for the first time. Because I had a brother who died of untreated asthma when we were children. Our family couldn't afford proper care. Sarah was stunned by this revelation. Your brother had asthma like Marcus? Victoria nodded, her perfect composure cracking. When I saw Marcus struggling to breathe in the store that first day, I remembered David, my little brother. Then why fight the foundation? Sarah asked. It would help children like your brother. Because I was angry, Victoria admitted. Angry that rich people like the Harringtons only care about medical problems when it affects them personally. Where was this foundation when David needed help? They stood in silence for a moment. What do you want me to do with this information? Sarah finally asked. I don't know, Victoria said honestly. I thought revealing it would satisfy me somehow. But now, Sarah made a decision. Come to the opening. Not as an enemy, as a guest who understands why this foundation matters. Victoria looked surprised. You want me there? After everything? The foundation isn't about the past, Sarah said. It's about making sure other children don't suffer like your brother did. Like Marcus almost did. Victoria hesitated, then handed Sarah the envelope of letters. These belong to you. As Victoria walked away, Sarah stood holding the letters from a past she never knew existed. Inside the building, Richard was preparing to launch a future built on second chances. She put the letters in her purse. There would be time to read them later. Today was about moving forward. Sarah tucked the envelope of letters into her purse and walked back into the building. Her mind raced with questions about the past, but today was about the future. She found Richard checking last-minute details for the ceremony. Everything okay? He asked, noticing her expression. Yes, Sarah smiled, pushing thoughts of Victoria and the letters aside. Just nervous about all the people coming. Guests began arriving at 10 o'clock. The foundation's reception area filled with healthcare professionals, donors, and families from Brightmoor. Sarah was surprised to see Victoria slip quietly through the door, standing at the back of the room. The mayor of Detroit arrived, followed by news cameras and reporters. Richard had arranged for 20 families who would receive the foundation's first round of assistance to attend as honored guests. At precisely 10:30, Richard stepped to the small podium. The crowd fell silent. Thank you all for coming today, he began. The Marcus Foundation represents something very special to me. It started with a desperate visit to my jewelry store. Richard looked at Sarah, who stood with the triplets near the front. 6 months ago, a mother came to Harrington Jewelers hoping to sell her grandmother's ring. She needed money for her son's asthma medication. What she didn't know was that the ring had little monetary value, but her visit would change everything. The crowd listened intently as Richard continued. That mother was Sarah Johnson. The son who needed medication was Marcus. And the desperate transaction that day turned out to be the most valuable exchange of my life. because it reunited me with the family I never knew I had. Richard explained how he discovered the triplets were his sons and how Sarah had raised them alone for 10 years while navigating healthcare challenges. The more I learned about Sarah's struggles with the healthcare system, the more I realized how many families face similar battles every day. Children shouldn't suffer because their parents can't afford medication. That's why we created the Marcus Foundation. Richard gestured toward the covered display case in the center of the room. Today, I want to unveil something special that represents our mission. He walked to the case and removed the velvet cloth. Inside, displayed on a simple stand, was Sarah's grandmother's gold ring. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Real value isn't always visible at first glance." Sarah gasped, tears filling her eyes. "This ring has little monetary value," Richard explained to the crowd, "but the courage it took for Sarah to bring it here, to seek help for her son, that's worth everything. It represents the determination of parents who will do anything for their children's health." Richard invited Sarah to speak next. She walked to the podium nervously, having never addressed such a large group before. "I'm not used to public speaking," she began. "For 10 years, I've been focused on just getting through each day, working multiple jobs, navigating insurance denials, choosing between paying for medicine or paying the electric bill." Sarah spoke honestly about the reality of raising a child with medical needs while living in poverty. She described nights spent watching Marcus struggle to breathe, the helplessness of not being able to afford treatments, and the exhaustion of fighting the healthcare system. "No parent should have to choose between their child's medicine and paying rent," she said firmly. "The Marcus Foundation will help families like mine bridge that gap. We'll provide not just financial assistance, but guidance through the complicated healthcare system." Many in the audience nodded, some wiping away tears. Even Victoria, standing at the back, seemed moved. After the speeches, Richard invited the triplets forward for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Michael, Marcus, and Mason stood together, each holding a section of the wide blue ribbon stretched across the foundation's entrance. "On the count of 3, Richard instructed, handing them ceremonial scissors. 1, 2, 3. The boys cut the ribbon together as cameras flashed. The Marcus Foundation was officially open. For the next hour, guests toured the facilities, enjoyed refreshments, and spoke with staff about the foundation's services. Richard introduced the triplets to the mayor, who seemed impressed with Mason's thoughtful questions about city healthcare initiatives. Sarah noticed Victoria standing alone by the display with her grandmother's ring. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said, approaching her. Victoria nodded. "It's a beautiful ceremony. The foundation will help many families, including those with children like your brother," Sarah said gently. Victoria's perfect composure slipped just slightly. "Yes, David would have been 32 this year." Before Sarah could respond, Richard joined them, surprised to see Victoria. "I invited her," Sarah explained quickly. Richard looked between the two women, clearly confused. "I owe you both an apology," Victoria said. "My methods were wrong, even if my concerns were genuine." "Your concerns?" Richard asked. "About using business resources for personal reasons," Victoria clarified. "But I see now that this foundation is more than personal. It's necessary." After Victoria left, Richard turned to Sarah. "What was that about?" "I'll explain later," Sarah promised, touching her purse where the letters waited. "Today is about celebrating." The ceremony concluded successfully, with several major donors pledging additional support. By afternoon, the guests had departed, leaving only staff to clean up. Richard found Sarah in her office looking out over Detroit. "We did it," he said, standing beside her. "Yes, we did," Sarah agreed. "Thank you for displaying my grandmother's ring. It means a lot." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. "Sarah," Richard said finally, "we've been so busy with the foundation and the boys that we haven't talked about us." "Is there an us?" Sarah asked cautiously. I'd like there to be, Richard admitted, but I understand if it's too soon. We're still getting to know each other again after 11 years. Sarah nodded. The boys come first. They need stability. I agree, Richard said. We can take things slowly. 6 months later, the Marcus Foundation had helped over 200 children access medical care. The jewelry store continued to thrive, with many customers specifically coming to support the business with the social mission. Richard had settled into his modest home in Greenlawn. Most evenings, he joined Sarah and the boys for dinner, helping with homework afterward. On weekends, they often did activities together as a family. On a warm Saturday in September, they gathered for a special dinner celebration. Marcus had gone 30 days without using his rescue inhaler, his first asthma-free month since he was a toddler. To Marcus, Richard raised his glass of water in a toast, and to his strong lungs. Everyone clinked glasses as Marcus beamed with pride. Doctor, Chen says I might be able to join the soccer team next spring, he announced. That's wonderful news, Sarah said. After dinner, Michael showed everyone his latest jewelry design, a pendant he had created in Richard's workshop. It's for the foundation, he explained. We could sell them and use the money to help more kids. That's a great idea, Richard praised. We'll put them in the store next week. Mason, who had grown more talkative in recent months, told them about his debate team's victory in the city championship. My speech about healthcare access got the highest score, he said. I used real examples from the foundation. As the boys cleared the dinner dishes, Richard and Sarah watched them with pride. They've changed so much in a year, Sarah observed. We all have, Richard replied. Sarah had finally read Richard's old letters, which revealed he had tried repeatedly to contact her after leaving for Stanford. They had both been victims of his parents' interference, but discussing it had helped heal old wounds. Their relationship had developed slowly and naturally. They were partners in parenting and in the foundation before anything else. Romance had grown gradually from a foundation of respect and shared purpose. In the kitchen, the boys laughed together as they loaded the dishwasher. Michael and Mason teased Marcus about a girl in his class, while Marcus threatened to put soap in their shampoo bottles in revenge. We started with a ring of little value, Richard whispered to Sarah, but created something priceless. Sarah smiled, watching her sons, their sons, together and happy. The journey had been difficult, with unexpected turns and painful revelations. But standing here in this kitchen, with this family they had built together, she knew they had found something rare and precious. A second chance at happiness, built on truth and commitment that would last a lifetime. In the foundation office, Sarah's grandmother's ring remained displayed prominently, reminding everyone who visited that true value isn't always obvious at first glance. Sometimes it must be discovered, recognized, and nurtured into something beautiful and lasting. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.